Hey everybody, and welcome back to the channel. Today you're checking out a Stamina Sorcerer PvP build. This has been updated for the Murkmire DLC, and I'm calling this build the Punisher. And that's because the point of this build is not just pure damage, but to actually punish your enemies into submission. This is a one-hand and shield build running lots of debuffs, damage debuffs, armor debuffs, health debuffs. We've also got a very strong CC and a lot of tankiness and health recovery and healing. And overall, just a really fun build to play. So let's get right into it. We'll go over the stats, the gear, the skills, some champion point options, and more coming up next. Alright, so let's jump into the stats first on the build. Before we do that, just a couple of quick disclaimers. Keep in mind, this is not a pure damage build. I'm going for more of like a tank setup almost, running a lot of debuffs, running heavy armor. So the weapon damage is not super high, but we do have good stats overall. And also keep in mind, I don't have Undaunted maxed on this character yet. So your stats could actually improve from here. And we also have the race passive changes coming for Orc, which I am an Orc, and it's going to have more weapon damage in the future, which is pretty cool. I'm looking forward to that on this character, actually. But let me buff up a little bit here first. So, max magicka is coming in at about 11k, max health 18k, that'll be about 22, 23 in PvP. Max stamina is about 40, almost 41k. Our stamina recovery is a little bit low, 1300, but we are a stamina sorcerer, so we do have Dark Deal to help with that. Weapon damage is sitting at about 3100 right now. We do have a Berserker glyph on the back bar, so fully buffed, you'll be sitting at maybe 37, 3800. And again, with as much stamina as we have and running heavy armor, it's not bad. It's really decent damage. It gets the job done. For your resistances, make sure I have that buffed. Sitting at about 24,000 physical and spell. This does get boosted quite a bit from our ransack buff that we have running, so that will go up. And then sitting at about 2400 crit resist right now. I do have 64 points into stamina. Running the Warrior Mundus, this is just helping to get our weapon damage up a little bit higher. I have Dubious right now. I would definitely recommend Artaeum Takeaway Broth on this build. If you can afford it, the extra health recovery will be very nice. You also get a little bit extra max stam and stamina recovery on the Artaeum, so definitely try that out if you can afford it. For the potions, you definitely need a very specific potion here. I think it's called Essence of Weapon Crit. Let's see. The reason why you want this is you do not have a weapon crit buff on the Stam Sorc, so you get the extra 10% weapon critical, which is very helpful. You also get the extra health, which is actually kind of like a burst heal on Stamina Sorcerer, so it's very good. It also increases your health recovery for the full duration, and then you just have the stamina buff as well. So definitely look for Essence of Weapon Crit, or if you can craft those, even better. You will certainly benefit from the extra health and the extra weapon crit. Last but not least, I am an Orc on this particular build. And I do like the way that Orc synergizes with this build. You get the extra movement speed, extra melee damage. Also, I mentioned in Wrathstone, you'll be getting a nice boost to weapon damage. So think about Orc if you're trying to Stamina Sorcerer for the first time. Other great options would be Nord. If you want to be even more defensive, even more tanky on the setup than a Nord, it's going to be very good for this. And if you want some extra sustain, then think about Redguard, because you're going to get some nice buffs to cost reduction going that way. So let's jump into the gear next. Starting off with our first 5-piece set, we've got Might of the Lost Legion. This is a crafted set from the Murkmire DLC. And you get max stamina, max magicka, weapon and spell damage on the 4-piece. And for the 5-piece bonus, after blocking, you get 3 uses of Empower. If you don't know what Empower does, it basically increases your light attack damage by quite a lot, by 40%. And that's on the next 3 light attacks after blocking. Thought about this on the Stamina Sorcerer for a couple of different reasons. Number one is you actually get a passive from your Bound Armament skill, where you actually also get an increase to your light attack damage just built into your front bar. So this will stack, giving you about 50% or more increase on your light attacks. Since we are also a heavy armor build, just having a lot of damage from light attacks, since we don't have a lot of sustain, is actually nice. You can get in a quick block, and then the burst potential is kind of surprising, actually. You can do a couple of quick light attacks and actually deal a very good amount of damage for free, right? It doesn't cost you anything to do a light attack. Just a little bit of stamina to get that block in, and then you have some free burst damage. So kind of going with that Punisher theme, you're going to do some blocking and then immediately counterattack your enemy with some very heavy light attacks. I think it works pretty well. So the way that I've set this up is I'm running Sword and Board front bar. I have just a sword Nirnhoned on the front bar with my shield Impen, max stamina on that, and I am using a stamina restore glyph on that weapon. And then I also have 3 pieces on the body. So using the heavy chest, heavy legs, and heavy boots, all Impen, all max stamina to complete that 5-piece. Going along with this set, I wanted something that would just give me lots of stats overall. So for my next 5-piece, I went with Hulking Draugr there. We have stamina, 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 and then about 2,400 stamina on the 5-piece. So you're getting lots of stamina. This is boosted by your Sorcerer passives as well from some of our abilities. So overall, this is what's getting us well over 40k max stamina on the build. So yes, even though the weapon damage isn't super high, your light attacks and your damage overall will still be very, very strong because of your max stamina on this build. So I'm using 3 pieces of jewelry there to make that happen, and then 2 medium pieces because it is a medium armor set. The best location for that is going to be hands and waist, and then the rest of my pieces are heavy. So this is a 5 heavy, 2 medium setup. I don't have the best traits here, but obviously Impen would be the best on those. For my jewelry, I wanted to run some different traits here because we have so much max stamina. This is where you can really customize the build and make it interesting, I think. So the first trait I chose was Swift, and I'm using this on my neck piece. You get the 6% movement speed here, which is very good since we are a heavy armor build. We don't have a gap closer necessarily, so movement speed is going to be important, definitely. So I like having at least 1 Swift trait on the build. To go with that, I actually picked Bloodthirsty for another trait. And with Bloodthirsty, you're getting an extra 9% damage on each piece if the enemy is within execute range. Since we are a Sword and Board build, there's no execute there. So I thought I just want to increase that damage a little bit. You know, when I've got an opponent down within execute range, got them fully debuffed, I want to be able to do some extra damage. So I like Bloodthirsty here on this setup just to make that happen. I only had enough gems here for 1 trait, but if you had enough, I would definitely suggest 2 Bloodthirsty. So that setup would be 1 Swift and 2 Bloodthirsty. Right now I just have Robust for my 3rd trait there. For our enchantments, we're using all weapon damage here, 3 weapon damage. Like I said, max stamina on all your pieces, Impen if possible. For my offhand, my back bar, sorry, I should mention that I am using 2 axes. That's just for an extra bleed potential on my back bar when I'm doing rending slashes. For that setup, I would definitely recommend an infused main hand with a weapon damage berserker glyph. That's going to give you that extra weapon damage on your back bar. With that, I also threw in a Crusher enchantment, just upping the punishment a little bit more, so reducing physical and spell resistance on all our targets. I went with a defending trait here that's just be a little bit extra tanky on my back bar. You could also do infused here. Double infused on the back bar would be pretty strong, I think. And then last but not least, for our monster set, you have a few different options here. What I went with first, this is the more offensive, the more punishing setup, is going to be Tremor Scale. You get a nice 1-piece max stamina bonus for Tremor Scale. And then on the 2-piece, when you taunt, you get a 50% chance to proc this Dune Ripper. Does about 8k physical damage and a 70% snare, which is insane. I can't believe this is still in the game. 70% snare is really strong. It's also AoE, so this is quite effective when you are fighting against other groups. Basically, proc this, get them all snared, and then start debuffing away. You will have a very high chance to proc this because our main spammable Ransack is a taunt, so the uptime on this will be very high if you decide to use it. The other option, which I would recommend, especially if you are not playing with a healer or you're playing a little bit more solo life, then switch that out for Troll King. Troll King's going to give you the nice health recovery bonus when you drop below 50% health. You'll get very high health recovery, especially if you are running the Artaeum Takeaway Broth. This is going to be very nice. So those are your options there. Again, just trying something a little bit different. I like this Lost Legion setup. If this is not for you, you can easily substitute another heavy armor setup, like, let's say, Fury or 7th Legion, but everybody knows about those. So give this a try. It's a pretty cool setup. And let's jump into the skills next. So let's check out the front bar first. Sword and Board. Starting off with Heroic Slash. I really like this on the Stamina Sorcerer. It does pretty decent damage, actually. You get a snare. You get the Minor Maim, so this is very good on bursty enemies. If they're kind of bothering your group, make sure you open with this. They'll do a lot less damage. Then you also get the Minor Heroism buff, which is going to give you a lot of nice ultimate back. So very nice to have on your front bar. It is a bit costly on the heavy armor setup, so just keep that in mind. You don't want to spam that ability too much. Next up, we've got Reverb Bash. This is not so much for damage, but for the defile. You get the major defile and the stun combined together. So this is going to be very good for Battlegrounds against those healer builds like a Templar, Magicka Warden, Stamina Nightblade, anything that is just healing through your group's damage. This is going to take them out very easily. Keep in mind, though, that your major defile is only 4 seconds. So you may have to reapply this if you need to, but it's definitely worth it. Next up is Resolving Vigor. This is just our heal over time on the build. Use this anytime you take damage. For our main spammable, we are using Ransack. Ransack is very low cost, does a good amount of physical damage. It's going to help to proc Tremor Scale if you are using that monster set. And basically debuffs the enemy's armor by quite a bit, making them take more damage from you, and then you also get a nice buff to your physical resistance for 12 seconds as well, making you more tanky. Last but not least, very important for the Stamina Sorcerer is going to be Bound Armaments. This has an active effect where it increases your block mitigation. I have used that a few times, but for the majority of the time, you're just using this for the passive effect, which is very strong. I mentioned this earlier. This is one of the reasons why I wanted to try the Lost Legion set, because this ability also buffs light attacks for Stamina Sorcerers by 11%, which isn't a lot, but when you start stacking that with things like your Empower from Lost Legion, that can add up and be pretty darn strong. And then the 8% max stamina is nothing to laugh at. This is how we get over 40k stamina on the build, having this slotted on the front bar. It's basically almost a version of Mage Light for the Stamina Sorcerer. So very good ability. Don't overlook this at all. You also get some nice passives from DAEDRIC Summoning when you have this slotted. You get increased health and stamina recovery by 20%. Keep that in mind too. So you always want a DAEDRIC summoning skill slotted on both bars if you can. And this is how we're going to fill that slot on the front bar. Then for your ultimate, you actually have a lot of options here on the Sword and Board build, which are interesting. I like Dawnbreaker of Smiting just because it's basically instant burst, instant AoE burst when you need it. and instant AoE stun. So this is very punishing on your tank build. It can do lots of damage, does damage over time even. With the stun, it's just great to have, and it's instant. Some other options that you might want to play with on this setup, which are pretty cool, is actually the One Hand and Shield ultimate, Shield Discipline. This makes all your One Hand and Shield abilities free for 6 seconds, and you automatically block for 6 seconds. One thing that's cool about that is, remember, when we block on this setup, you get the 3 empowers, light attack empowers, for free. So basically the way that works, if you proc your Shield Discipline, you'll have unlimited empowered light attacks while that is active for 6 seconds. So that's pretty cool. You can do that if you want. It's a little bit less bursty, but kind of good for sustain too, because again, your One Hand and Shield abilities are free at that point when that ultimate is active. And something else you can try just for fun, just if you want to try something different, is Power Overload. Power Overload is basically a buffed light attack that gets about 11k damage on your light attacks. It does cost ultimate. The ultimate gets depleted for each light attack, but these are also empowered, so those become 40% stronger after you block using Might of the Lost Legion. So you can hit somebody with a Reverb Bash, get them stunned, and then, after you've blocked and procced your Empower, just drop tons of overload damage on them. That's kind of fun to do as well. But for me, majority of the time, Dawnbreaker or Smiting is going to be the way to go on the front bar. Switching gears to our back bar, this is a dual-wield back bar. So our first ability is going to be Blood Craze. You can also use Rending Slashes, but I don't find the difference in damage to be that huge. What's nice about this is you get the healing. So a little bit of extra healing is nice on the build, but you can choose either morph here. By the way, I don't think I mentioned it in the setup, but if you have Master Dual Wield, definitely put that on your back bar. You don't need Might of the Lost Legion on both bars. It is handy to be able to proc that Empower on both bars, but really you just need it on your front bar, and if you happen to have that Master's Dual Wield, that combined with your Rending Slashes or Blood Craze on the back bar, that's going to do a lot of upfront damage for sure. Basically, I will use this skill to initiate a fight and to proc my Berserker Glyph on my back bar, so think about that possibility if you have access to it. It's going to be very, very strong. Next up is Quick Cloak. This is actually one of my favorite abilities now on a stamina character running dual wield. One of the reasons is we get Major Evasion. Major Evasion is 25% damage mitigation from AoE attacks. So think about that. Dawnbreaker is AoE, Leap is AoE, Destro ult is AoE. So these big AoE ultimates that are flying everywhere in PvP, you're going to be taking a lot less damage from them when you have your Quick Cloak active. The other nice thing about that is you do get Major Expedition for 4 seconds. So this basically, with our Swift trait and with another one of our buffs that gives us Minor Expedition, it's going to make us very fast and basically act as a gap closer. You can close a distance very quickly using this ability, and then just make sure it's up all the time. It has a pretty short duration, 15 seconds, but you always want that Major Evasion buff active. Next up is Dark Deal, and I think this is pretty essential to the Heavy Armor Stamina Sorcerer because you get health almost like a burst heal, actually, 8k health on this tooltip, and then 3600 stamina back. There is a cast time though, so keep that in mind. You can be interrupted, but this is still a great sustain tool. You can pop 4 or 5 of these in a row and basically get from 0 stamina to almost full stamina back. So very helpful buff to have. It helps you sustain in heavy armor with almost no stamina recovery, letting you run full weapon damage glyphs on the setup. Next up, we just have our 2 buffs. Crit Surge gives you Major Brutality, which is very nice. Buffs your weapon damage by 20%. That's why you don't need to run a 2-hander on Stamina Sorcerer, though you can if you want. But you also get a nice heal, 3k heal every 1 second every time you get a crit, so definitely run this buff. Have it up all the time. Has about a 30-second duration, so basically double the duration of your other buffs when you have your 15-second quick cloak. And then we also have Hurricane, another 15-second buff, which gives us Major Resolve, Major Ward, and Minor Expedition. So we get that extra 10% movement speed and our extra 5k resists, which is just awesome. This is an amazing skill. And it does some nice AoE damage over time as well. Last up for the ultimate, just keep in mind that you can put anything here, but we do want to proc or have active that DAEDRIC summoning passive, DAEDRIC protection. So my thinking is I want this definitely on both bars to get this active on the back bar. I don't have any DAEDRIC protection skills. I don't have room to run bound armaments on the back bar, though I wish I could. You'd have to drop something like Dark Deal. Since I prefer to have Dark Deal, then I can run the ultimate and still get my passives from this. It does cost 170 ultimate, so it's a little bit expensive. But if you have the ultimate for it, it's pretty cool. You just drop down your Atronach, does some nice AoE damage, and you can actually kind of kite around it, kind of underneath it, and it'll take off some pressure for you while you heal, so it can be useful for sure. Okay, so let's take a quick look at champion points. I did set this up for no CP Battlegrounds, so keep that in mind. Sword and board builds are really effective in Battlegrounds. I think champion point campaign not quite as much, but you can definitely make it work. So this is what I would recommend if you're trying to do that. So 37 Warlord, 35 Sprinter, 56 into Tenacity, 11 Arcanist, 64 Mooncalf, 23 into Healthy, 9 into Shadow Ward, 34 into Tumbling. You can decide to put a little bit more into Befoul, but I don't really think you need it. 30% is already pretty strong, but you can decide to dump a few from Healthy into that Befoul node if you want. 19 into Blessed, 25 Physical Weapon, 72 Master Arms, 31 into Shattering Blows, 56 Mighty, 30 Piercing, 28 Precise Strikes, 9 Thaumaturge, 61 into Ironclad, 44 into Resistant, 49 into Hardy and Elemental Defender, 34 into Thick Skinned, and then 32 into Quick Recovery. Well, that's going to wrap it up for this build video for the Punisher Stamina Sorcerer PvP build. If you enjoyed this video at all, make sure you just take a second, drop a like, leave me a comment if you have any questions. I'll be glad to answer those for you. If you have any ideas for future builds that you want to see on the channel, make sure to let me know about those in the comments too. And until then, I will see you around in the next video. Thanks.